Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this edition of the Dean Society call with Dean Rajan. My name is Murli Buluswar. I'm a graduate with an MBA from the class of 2001.
And I'm Ruchi Kumar, IMBA 2001.
We are delighted that you're able to join. As you know, the Dean Society is an elite group of supporters of Chicago Booth. It is alumni who are supporting to the tune of $2,500 and higher every year and represents the top 10% of all contributors to the University of Chicago from its alumni base. Now, as I think about it, one of the questions that people ask me is, Murli and Ruchi, why do you continue to support University of Chicago? And the quote that comes to mind is an F. Scott Fitzgerald quote that says, look, true intelligence is the ability to hold opposing ideas in your mind at the same time. And I believe that that quote is more powerful today than ever before. In a world where many sources of media and institutions teach us what to think, University of Chicago continues to challenge us and its students on how to think. And that to me is a precious core competency for University of Chicago, and we are very proud to be members of this society.
So a few details. Our presentation will last for 45 minutes today. We will moderate a conversation with Dean Rajan, and then we should have 15 to 20 minutes to answer questions that were submitted to you prior to the event or that you can submit during our event. Please do not hesitate to use the Q&A box for that. Questions and comments are welcome during the session. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Dean Rajan, the George Pratt Schultz Professor of Accounting and Dean at Chicago Booth since July 2017. Dean Rajan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate both the fact that you are Dean Society donors and the fact that you're made the effort to host this event. I think this is wonderful, and I really appreciate that. And I love the quote that you gave, because that is really Chicago. I think that we're very proud as an institution, not just as Booth, that we encourage people to think, we encourage people to come up with dissenting points of view, and to be able to engage in dialogue around issues rather than being ideological about any one thing. So I love it.
Thank you. I think, Dean, we're going to punt it back to you to share any introductory remarks you might have before we jump into the Q&A session.
Yeah, I just want to say, it's wonderful to be at school. It sounds like, getting back to normal has never been so nice. So it's been 18 months since we shut the school down, right? It was March, I think 10th of last year that we went to shelter in place. And last week on Monday, classes began in person at Harper and at Bleacher. And that's just been amazing to see. All the students back. Faculty are all back. We have research seminars again in person. So just the activity level at Harper and Bleacher has been wonderful. Obviously, the last 18 months have been not the most easy of times for the school, but I think we've come through it very well. And to be honest, it's largely thanks to our alumni. I think their willingness to keep the school going, to provide the resources for us to continue on our mission. And that's really what we focused on during the mission, is just how do we keep, providing faculty with the resources to do what they know how to do? How do we keep the teaching mission going? And we obviously had to switch modalities, go into, remote teaching rather than in person. But I think at the end of the day, we did a really good job continuing to be who we are as a great school. And it's honestly the only way it worked is because of your help, your support, and our willingness to be a bit flexible in how we chose to deal with issues as they came up. So thank you all.
Thank you, Dean. And that's a perfect setup. The way we'd like to structure the next 45-ish minutes is Ruchi and I've got a few questions for you that do sort of unpack many of the themes that you just alluded to. And we'll also be monitoring the live chat session for any questions that any of the participants might have as well.
Sure.
But before we get a little bit deeper on a slightly more sort of icebreaker note, we know you as an incredible ambassador for the University of Chicago Booth School of Business and a wonderful leader at the university more broadly. And we read articles and see your public persona quite a bit. The question that I have for you is, tell us something about you at a more personal level that we don't know, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Um, so I would say that I didn't travel much at all growing up. I don't think I went on any sort of foreign visit till I was 25 or 26, but I used to read a lot, read books about strange places, sort of exotic things. And so when I turned 50, my wife and our two daughters, we decided to go to the most remote place in the world. So we did a trip to Easter Island, which is this little, speck in the middle of the South Pacific, where the big stone monuments were discovered in the 1700s. So that was sort of one of the big things on my bucket list, and we ended up doing that for my 50th birthday. I mean, it's a long way away, but I would highly recommend it to anybody who wants to just go to some place that is so far off from anything else, and to see these weird, stone carvings that the natives did there. So I would say sort of travel is something I've enjoyed, and that was kind of a highlight trip that we took.
How fascinating. First of all, to know that you've actually turned 50. Secondly, I completely sense your sort of passion for the Moais, and that is sort of one of the unresolved mysteries of how they were created, how they were transported, what was the significance, were they meant to represent ancestors who passed away, or were they some other form of decoration? That's something that science has still not been able to solve. And in fact, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, we had the privilege of being able to go there, and I can completely relate to what an incredible experience it must have been for your family and you.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry, did you have a question? So question for you, this year sort of in particular sort of represents, if you think about the academic year, represents a little bit of a new beginning. Mm-hmm. There's sort of a new normal that we've adjusted to. That's a baseline that we didn't have a year and a half ago. And as you think about the new academic year that just literally started, I think about 10 days or 12 days ago, mm-hmm. What are your aspirations? To use sort of baseball parlance, what is your definition of a home run for the Booth School of Business in this academic year, which is quite pivotal in the context of everything that is happening in the world around us?
Yeah, I would say the one easy way to describe it would be, I think getting back to normal would be a home run. But I don't think the normal is going to be the old normal. So I think figuring out what the new normal is going to be the big piece of what we do. In some ways, the pandemic forced us to do things which we would never have done otherwise. And I think that's true for a lot of institutions, right? I don't think we could have ever persuaded all our faculty to switch their teaching to online, for example, right? There would have literally been a revolt. But when the time came to do it last March, they all did it. We didn't cancel a single course, which is something I'm very, very proud of. And so sort of having had that experience now, I think for us, the big questions sort of going forward are, this year we're doing largely in person for the full-time program, particularly because that's something I think the students really want. But we're also experimenting with, the hybrid or dual modality classes for our part-time programs. We're experimenting with part-time work for the staff. And so this autumn in particular is really a very interesting time, right? It's sort of a transition back. There are some staff who are very nervous about the transitioning back, which I think is true at many companies as well. And so right now we have the staff on sort of a minimum 2 days a week mode. Then they're going to go to 3 days a week in, I think, end of October. And in real Chicago fashion, what we have done is to say, these are all experiments. So we have a future of work committee that is gathering data with 2 days a week. They'll gather data with 3 days a week. And then in January, they'll put together a report about what's working, what's not working. And hopefully that will guide us sort of going forward once the pandemic is over. How much of the past do we revert to versus what do we change going forward? And so I think it's a very exciting time from that standpoint. I think autumn is still going to be a bit rough, as you all probably saw last week, right? Harvard Business School had to close down because they had a big COVID cluster. Mm-hmm. We haven't thankfully had that, but how do we react to something like that this year versus last year? And so all that is, I think, TBD, but ultimately this is a 4 to 6 month experiment. in preparation for what I think will be sort of heading into a new normal starting from, let's say, March 1 onward. So I think it's an exciting time for me, just figuring it out, being able to stay open and identifying the new normal and bringing everybody with us to it, I think is going to be the definition of success.
It's certainly a more broadly, not just for Booth, but across firms in corporate America, a transitory period to sort of say, look, we figured out that things can be pretty productive even if you're not in person. That's something that we understood, but then we missed the human piece of it. And how do you sort of juggle and find that right balance is something that I think all firms are trying to solve for, including mine, Citi, where at the moment we're going in about 2 days a week and trying to see if we can find that healthy balance. Of course, in New York, you've got people with 1 to 2.5 hour commutes and such. So there's something to be said about that, but there's also something to be said about the quote unquote water cooler conversations.
Right. And I think one thing that's a bit different for an educational institution is that, yes, we were productive last year in the sense that people stayed at home and things got done, but that was in an environment where there were no students on campus, right? And yes, so if we had to deliver things remotely, we know how to do it with everybody being remote. But we haven't faced the situation where we had 1,200 students on campus in Harper.
Yeah.
Then remote doesn't work, right? And so then we need some, physical presence to just do the regular jobs, student life and mentoring and things like that. And that's what we're trying to figure out. So we know that everybody remote can work, although it's not great.
Yeah.
What we don't know is with everybody here, how much of the part-time work can actually make this successful. So, it's TBD, but that's sort of what makes it interesting.
Excellent point, because you don't want a partial experience for a bunch of students that aren't even sort of stepping foot on campus, because then there's sort of a dichotomy in the overall sort of learning and growth process as well. I imagine, Dean Rajan, in course of the last year and a half, you've probably spent quite a bit of time with other deans and senior administrators at other institutions and such. My question for you is, as you've had these dialogues with your peers across other institutions, how have you thought about ways in which Booth will take its own path, and where do you see sort of commonality with respect to how other academic institutions are approaching this new normal transition?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in general, we have relatively little contact with other schools, right? We do have this M7, or sort of what we call the top 7 MBA schools, and there is sort of a meeting that we used to do every year, which kind of got derailed because of antitrust reasons, right? We're not allowed to actually discuss anything good, tuition, financial aid, right? All that is off the table. So the meetings have kind of disintegrated. Last year when COVID happened, we did meet a couple of times just to talk about how are you going to sort of deal with this situation. And the thing that really came out is mostly what drove the way the schools reacted to things was sort of local regulations. Because you could have your own rules, whether you're Wharton or MIT or whatever, but ultimately the city of Philadelphia, the city of Boston, the rules that they put in tended to be what was the dominant factor in how they ended up doing things, whether they were in person or not, right? Whether faculty could teach in a classroom or not. And so it was ultimately a very frustrating year, I think, for all of us, because we could have great plans, but we had very little control over what would get done. The other big issue last year was, even as late as August of last year, none of the schools had any idea how many foreign students could actually come to campus, right? Because COVID was rampant outside the US, and none of the US consulates was actually open. So there are cases where we do collaborate. For example, when there were some indications about changing, how many student visas would be given, or saying that students had to be in person and that online students wouldn't be given F1 visas. So for those things we do collaborate, and universities collaborated. They went to court to try to change what the prior administration was trying to do, and they were successful. So we do collaborate at that level, and honestly, it was just nice to be able to speak to people who are dealing with very similar issues, talking about the problems that they were facing. Ultimately, we didn't I would say, do too many things together because, it was all the local regulations that determined which way we sort of ended up doing. For the most part, everybody was remote most of last year. I think that the one way we tried to deviate earlier this year was going back to April and May. It was very clear that our students were, they were tired, right? They'd had remote classes for the last three and a half quarters. Most of our peer schools had canceled graduation. And it seemed like doing something along those dimensions would be good. At that point, the University of Chicago had also decided that we would not have an in-person graduation. But we sort of pushed to do something. And so we were sort of unique in that we actually did a graduation at Soldier Field. So we just, because it's big enough and it's outdoors, and so we could sort of do it. And so we just, paid money, rented Soldier Field, did graduation. And actually the week earlier, we did an MBA celebration event at Wrigley Field. So our students got both of those in a week. So our alum, Tom Ricketts, who owns the Cubs, I emailed him and he was gracious enough to say, I'll give you Wrigley for an evening when the Cubs are not in town, have the students come. And so we actually did the celebration behind the home plate, with all the students and their SO sitting up in the stand. So that was wonderful. So we tried to do some things, I think, just so that the students leaving would feel like, that there was something positive that had come out of the experience.
How impressive. That's
Wonderful.
Well, this was a little bit of an off year for the Chicago Cubs, so they had a little bit more space than they normally do. But that was very kind and sort of a thoughtful way, because it's such a momentous occasion for graduates, whether it's an MBA or undergrad, and to not have the opportunity to celebrate that with your fellow classmates and your near and dear ones is a little bit of a missed opportunity in life. And it's nice that you were able to sort of figure that out in more thoughtful ways to make something happen. Thank you.
That was a good, I think they really liked the effort that we put in, because it was pretty unique, as I said, among the other schools. And the other thing we're doing is for the students who graduated last year who didn't have a graduation because of COVID, we've invited them all back next year, like around Reconnect time, so that we can actually do a ceremony at Rockefeller Chapel. And so we're trying to sort of make them whole, if you will, for the experience that they missed. So we're trying to do our best there.
That's fabulous. Thank you. They can renew their MBA vows even if it was a couple of years later. I've got a question from one of the participants that also does touch upon this topic, if I may, and I'm going to read it verbatim. And we may have covered parts of it, but I'll defer to you on which parts you might like to add. And it reads something like this. COVID-19 has challenged many previously held beliefs, processes, and norms in both business and education. What challenges and opportunities does Chicago Booth see in this disruption? And how does the school plan to capitalize on them that will benefit both current students and alumni? And I know we've sort of touched upon this, but any additional thoughts you might have on that?
I would say a couple, right? But I think it's a great question. I think one thing we realized last year was that relying on, doing, more events online is a much easier and faster way to connect with a much broader section of our alumni base than we did before. I mean, as you know, we used to do events in New York. I would come in person and we'd have some faculty there. We would do distinguished speaker series events in Chicago, like one a quarter maybe. But we realized by moving those online, we're able to do more events than before, get many more alumni to tune in than before, and just increase the level of engagement exponentially. So we used to do Economic Outlook in Chicago at the Sheraton, and we would get, like 1,200, 1,300 people in person, which was amazing. We did it online and we got something like 10,000 people last year, right? So just the scale is very different. And so that's something we're definitely going to keep doing going forward. So I'm doing a distinguished speaker event this evening, but it's virtual. And it's with Russ Hutchinson, who's the Chief Strategy Officer at Goldman Sachs, who's an alum.
Mate of ours, yes.
Oh, so again, this would have been much harder to coordinate. He flies into Chicago, whatever, right? It's just so much easier to do this. So that's something we're definitely going to do. The second thing, as I mentioned, is doing more online/remote teaching, giving more options, particularly to the part-time students. So we have a bunch of students who come in from Texas, right? We have a big sort of presence in Texas, and they fly in every Friday to Chicago. They take classes Friday, Saturday morning, Saturday evening, allowing them to do a portion of their MBA through either dual modality or online is something that we're now going to do, right? we don't want to change the experience too much. But if during the winter quarter they would rather stay in Texas and just take the classes, sort of remote, and then start coming back in the spring, that seems like a win-win, from our standpoint. So those are changes we would never have anticipated doing before COVID. And the third thing I would say is the whole ability to hire staff now who are maybe no longer even living in Chicago. If we can sort of expand the pool of staff by saying, if you're in a role, let's say in admissions or in information technology, you don't really need to be in Harper every day seeing people. And so I think that's something the university as a whole is going to be much more open about doing, is just having a more national workforce, if you will, whether it's postdocs, regular staff. That's something, again, we're going to do a lot more now that we've sort of learned we can do it during COVID. It's not all the roles, as you know, right? Some sort of student-facing roles have to be in person, but lots of other roles don't need to be. So I think in some ways we've learned from COVID, and the key is to take those lessons and apply them judiciously sort of going forward.
Terrific. Thank you for that. I've got one more question before I hand it to Ruchi, but before I do that, I just wanted to invite all of our participants, if you've got a question on your minds, please do type that into the chat, and we'll be sure to pick that up sometime in the next 20 minutes to a half an hour for sure. My next question to you, Dean, is on the call are members of the Dean Society. These are alumni who believe in the mission and the vision for the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, and who've sort of taken that belief to that next level to support it in multiple ways, but financial being the most obvious one. My question for you is, if you could wave a magic wand and have 10 or 20 million more dollars in additional funding that you do not currently have access to, and you pick the number which makes sense, what is on your wish list? And what I would love to get out of that is some food for thought for all of the participants on this call to have a thinker on. What is that next frontier for the Booth School of Business that we could potentially help support in the next few years?
I would say the way I think about resources, right? It's sort of, is it student facing or faculty facing, right? Those are the two big parts of our mission, if you will. And I think on both of those, we have needs. So I would say on the student side, one of the big things that I've tried to do since becoming dean is to increase the amount of funding that we're able to give in terms of scholarships. Both, essentially to make sure that if somebody is qualified and is the right sort of person that we want to have at Booth, to make sure that they're able to come, right? And it's also a way of making sure that the most talented people are people that we get to have at Booth rather than going to maybe a peer institution. So we have, I think, close to double the amount of that we give out in scholarships. And largely we have done that through the school's own funding. And that's why we launched this campaign called Boundless a couple of years ago to enable sort of more funding to come into our endowment to use for scholarships. So I would say that's probably our single biggest need. It's always been a need, but we've sort of really tried to step that up. And both on the MBA side and a little bit on the also on the PhD side, that's sort of something that's a critical need for us. The other thing I would say is that as a school, we're always trying to be innovative in being able to support whatever faculty want to do that's sort of new and different. So we hired 3 years ago, as you know, Sendil Mullainathan from Harvard Economics, and Sendil now runs our Center for Applied Artificial Intelligence. And that's a center that, we don't have an endowment for it. So we basically fund it on an ongoing basis with the gifts that we get from alumni like you. And so anything that's sort of new and different, it's being funded through the gifts that we get sort of on an expendable ongoing basis through the annual fund and others. And so making sure that we're able to support the kind of work that Sendil is doing, making sure that we can support the healthcare initiative, which we began just this past year. Those are sort of our critical needs, I think. Healthcare, I would say, obviously a huge part of our GDP. And we're lucky that we were able to hire Matt Noto back from Northwestern to co-head the new initiative with Dan Edelman. And so that's again an initiative where we have no money for it, right? We're sort of supporting it on an ongoing basis. So I would say on the student side, finding more ways to support students coming in through scholarships would be something super important. And on the faculty side, supporting sort of new, interesting research directions like artificial intelligence and sort of healthcare, that's where I would use the funds. That would be the biggest need for them.
Very, very helpful. Thank you. It's hard not to feel excited about all that we could accomplish through the AI Center with Sendhil, a MacArthur Genius Award winner, and of course in healthcare, which takes up about 20 or 25% of our GDP, and continuing to push our boundaries on making education accessible on scale based on merit that pays minimal heed to capability to join. So wonderful, wonderful, noble causes, all three of them. Thank you for that. I will say one thing though, in my slightly biased mind, we don't have peers as an institution, we're peerless. But that's a slight bias.
Thank you.
I'm going to punt it over to Ruchi, if I may.
Thank you. Dean Rajan, you mentioned the healthcare initiative, and I'm very interested to hear a little bit more about that. I really enjoyed the conversation that we were able to have with Professor Noto, and I think if you could share with all the participants a little bit more about that, other partnerships, and what the successes that you've seen over the years. Perhaps you could even.
So I would say the impetus really. So Dan Edelman has been on our faculty a long time, and Dan has been wonderful at connecting with the medical school. So he helps the medical school with their processes, logistics stuff. He helps them with like ranking data. He runs a healthcare analytics lab where we have students coming in, actually, working hands-on with sort of healthcare data. And so it became very clear that this is an area where we have a lot of students who want to specialize in that space, but we don't really have kind of the we have Polsky for entrepreneurship, right? Or the Kilt Center for marketing. We really didn't have anything to support the vertical of healthcare, which, as Murli said, I mean, this is a huge part of our GDP. And so given the student interest in doing this, we felt like, it would be good, first of all, to have the right set of faculty to manage this. And hiring Matt Noto back. So Matt used to be at Booth, was given very early tenure at Northwestern, but he joined Booth back last year. So Matt and Dan is a great combination for us. Matt, for example, does work with Medicaid programs across the US, right? Trying to figure out, are these programs successful? How do we make them more successful? So the real goal of the healthcare initiative is to spur both faculty research on healthcare and healthcare programs, to help students coming in get access to a set of courses that will teach them, prepare them for a career in healthcare. And we also want to scale up our MD MBA program. So we have an MD MBA program joint with the U Chicago Medicine, which, honestly, we don't have that many students doing it, but we've had some amazing graduates from it. So the person who founded Oak Street Health went through our MD MBA program. The head of the Cancer Treatment Centers of America, actually the CEO was a graduate from our MD MBA program. So it's been small, but very successful. And we would love to scale that. And so Dan and Matt have also taken that role on as part of managing the healthcare initiative. So it's very exciting. And obviously there are lots of people across the university who are interested in this space as well. The Harris School of Public Policy, for example, right? They have a good sort of healthcare focus. So we feel we can do it well and collaborate with Harris and with medicine and others to make this a truly successful program. So the way it works at Chicago is when we start something new, we call it an initiative. And the goal is, that it can either take off or not. And in the past, we've been actually good about taking initiatives that weren't really working that well and killing them. I think, which is a hard thing for many organizations to do, right? It's easy to start things and then you just don't kill them. But we were pretty disciplined about killing certain things. This one, I think, has real legs. And generally, we start with an initiative, and if it builds momentum and becomes successful, hopefully at some point it becomes a center, like the Center for Decision Research or something like that. I think healthcare deserves to become a center eventually, and so that's sort of the vision for the initiative.
Very interesting. And where, if I could ask, on the spectrum does the AI program fit? Is that somewhere between an initiative and a center at this
AI
point?
began as a center directly just because we had so much interest and energy behind it. And when Sendil came over, I mean, he sort of knew what he wanted to do with the initiative. So he had a set of projects. He had some funding for it already from outside sources to kind of get it started up. So we began that with as a center directly, which is relatively rare, right? We wouldn't do it unless it was clearly established conceptually as to what it's going to be. And we knew that it was something that in the long run would be a successful model for the school to sort of pursue.
It's so interesting as I think about this intersection of AI and healthcare, Dean Rajan, is there are so many problems that can be solved on scale in this space. I was just thinking about this morning on NPR. They were talking about how there's a lawsuit against many of the pharmaceutical companies for not identifying how they were overprescribing OxyContin and other addictive painkillers. And I was thinking that's such a simple AI problem because you could, within a matter of days, you could actually identify hotspots where you've got a problem with excessive prescriptions being doled out for these addictive painkillers and such. And we're so far away, but yet so close to being able to harness that full power of those competencies that you're referring to bend the curve on the quality and the speed and the cost of healthcare in this country.
Yeah, no, I would add to that Sendil is actually an advisor for the healthcare initiative too, because a lot of the work he does is AI applied to healthcare, both in terms of predictive analytics. What's the best way to look at a chart to determine if somebody has a medical problem or not, right? If I look at data on people who are admitted to the emergency room at UChicago Medicine, how can I use it to identify who are women at risk for domestic abuse? So these are all actual papers that Sendil is working on. So you're right, that area is actually a great area for intersection. And I think we are sort of very well poised to have a big impact in that.
That's wonderful. And given these areas of competency that Booth has been developing, how might the curriculum have changed for students from 20 years ago when we were there to now? Are you seeing different classes that are available, or students are asking for certain topics to be covered? I'd be interested to hear what that's like.
Yeah, it's a great question. So last year, before the COVID hit, I set up a curriculum review committee. We typically do it every 6 to 7 years. And so they did their work through COVID. And in true Chicago fashion, they submitted a 60-page report, with appendices and, all kinds of data. So one of the main things they pointed out was just how much the curriculum had grown over the years, to the point where they've now recommended, there's no point doing this every 6 to 7 years. You need sort of a standing committee, just given the pace of change in the curriculum. So it's something we're very proud of. I would say the biggest thing contributing to the change in the curriculum has been the rise of these centers. So the Polsky Center, since coming up, has led to so many new classes being created in entrepreneurship. And in the Polsky Center case, it's interesting, and many of them are taught by not faculty in the tenure line, but by alumni, by practitioners who come and, who mentor these startups at Booth and sort of work with them. Similarly, Kilt Center, right? I mean, the number of marketing courses has exploded at Booth because of Kilts and the influence of quantitative marketing, which is a big competitive advantage for Booth, as you know. Similarly, the Rastandi Center, which is social sector innovation, they've added a bunch of classes on how do I think about impact investing? How do I think about joining a nonprofit board? Or how do I set up a social venture? So the rise of the centers has been accompanied by a complete change in the curriculum. And I would say the curriculum today looks almost nothing like it did 20 years ago. The core disciplinary classes are probably the same, but what's different now is all these areas that I would say are in between the disciplines or sort of at the intersection of them are being covered by the centers. So we started a new concentration 2-3 years ago on business analytics, for example, which it's amazing, right? You can now come to Booth, you can take a class on machine learning, digital marketing, you can take a class on app development, which is very popular, by the way. And so it's just a whole series of things you can now do. to, which I think is fantastic for us, right? We've always been the great data school. And we've been able to adapt and pivot our curriculum to reflect what is it that our students need to know, given what's coming, and also given what the employers are looking for from them when they try to hire them. So we now send more students to technology than to finance, right? Which is a big, big shift. So I think 2 years ago was the first time that it crossed. We sent more students to the West Coast than to the East Coast after they graduate. So it finally flipped, right? And so our biggest, fastest growing alumni region is Seattle. So we have a lot of students sort of moving, to the Amazons and Microsofts and other places, and to the Bay Area. And I think the curriculum has moved to support what they want to do. So you can still do, option pricing 3 if you wanted to, but you can also do a bunch of other classes that will prepare you for what's to come. So I would say that's something we're very happy with. Every year when I meet the students, I ask them, are there courses that we are not teaching? Speak to your peers at other schools, or maybe not peers, but whoever, speak to your friends at other schools and ask them, like, are there classes they're teaching that we're not offering anymore? When I first came to Booth, the one that I heard a lot was, we don't have enough courses in leadership. But we have sort of fixed that, right? We have the Davis Center for Leadership, and Rob Vishney has put together an amazing new set of classes along with Harry Davis. And that's the demand for that has sort of been off the charts. I think last year when I did it, I got almost nothing. I think one student wanted a class in global health, which we are now teaching using a faculty from the medical school. But beyond that, they really couldn't come up with anything that they feel we're not offering. If anything, the big complaint I get is we sort of have so many choices within Booth. How do I make that decision? Some students, of course, in true Chicago style, they work through all the data on points and bidding. They have algorithms for how to get which class. The arbitrage, if I take the same class at Gleacher on Wednesday evening, it's a higher probability I get it. Others simply think there's just too much choice. So the downside of that, I will tell you, is that I've been trying to push our students to take classes outside Booth at the law school, at the medical school. And I've been completely unsuccessful at doing that. And when I ask the students, their answer is, there's just too much I already have within Booth to pick from. I don't really need to go outside to do them. So it's sort of good news, bad news, if you will.
I have to say, Dean Rajan, what I'm loving about what you've just articulated is how Booth is doing a fine job of helping students both zoom in and zoom out. This ability to go multi-levels deep into a problem and solve for it at its most granular level, but yet then to be able to step back and sort of see the picture and the connectivity of the ecosystem within which you're trying to solve for the problem, whether that is people or whether that is a culture or anything else, really. And that's a very powerful set of skills that I think the students are learning now in an even more better way than we did when we were there 20 years ago, which will serve them in wonderful stead as they go on to the next chapters and beyond of their careers.
Absolutely. And that actually ties in a little bit to my next question. Is a few weeks ago, the university welcomed President Paul Elivisatos as the 14th president of the University of Chicago. What are your thoughts on some unifying points of strategy between Booth and the university? And I know you've mentioned Harris School of Public Policy and the medical school, but perhaps there are other potential areas of alignment.
Yeah, so Paul became the new president, I think, literally a month ago, and he hasn't even been inaugurated yet. I think the formal inauguration is sometime at the end of October. I think so I'll come back to that question, but let me answer the latter part first. So we've really tried very hard to integrate better with the university. From the standpoint, I just think the university is such a huge asset that we need to take advantage of. And we've done that through 2 or 3 different ways, right? One is we have a joint JD MBA program, which we launched this past year. What's nice about it is it's a 3-year JD MBA, right? So you could either do a JD in 3 years, like at Columbia or Yale or wherever, but we've figured out a way to combine classes at law and Booth so that in 3 years you can get your JD and your MBA from Booth. We launched this just a year ago, and the demand for this has been astonishing. And so that's become a very, very successful program right off the bat. We're a bit constrained in how many students we can let into it because the law school has sort of caps on and how many people they will let it. But that's a big example of collaboration that's been hugely successful. We have a joint MBA, Masters in Computer Science that we've been offering for the last 4 or 5 years. That's become very successful as well. So at the graduate level, I think we're doing a lot that's doing well. And of course, the big thing we started 3 years ago was the undergrad business economics major joint with the econ. That's again been very, very popular. I think it's now standalone, either the second or third most popular major at Chicago already. So huge demand. It's been a great thing for our faculty, particularly our young faculty, to come in and to be able to teach undergrads. Our faculty are now using them as research assistants. Once they discover, oh, here's somebody smart, I can make them work really hard. Our faculty are all for that. This has been a fantastic collaboration, and I think that's working well. With Paul coming in as the new president, he's very happy with these initiatives. I think what he would like us to do even more is maybe connect more to the Pritzker School of Molecular Engineering and think about, can we do, let's say you have a new undergrad coming to UChicago, majors in the School of Molecular Engineering. Could they do some classes at Booth so that they leave with something like an engineering management kind of, degree, concentration, whatever you call it. And I think that's something we would be very open to trying to do. Beyond that, I think what Paul is very happy about is the impact that Polsky has had outside of Booth. So Polsky has now become the umbrella for anything entrepreneurship related at the whole university. So what he would really like us to do is to take that spirit of sort of commercialization, innovation to the physical sciences, to the biological sciences, and be able to help them. So he views us really as sort of the content provider in that space, and he would love for us to do more with the sciences to sort of help them. So Paul's background really is chemistry, but then he very much likes the model of applied sciences. He used to run the Lawrence Livermore lab at Berkeley. And of course, we have Fermi and Argonne. And so it's kind of a natural fit in some ways, having him as president. So I think he'll be a great collaborator with us. He very highly values what we bring to the table. And he would simply like us to be, as helpful as possible to the rest of the university. So I think it was a very thoughtful choice by the Board of Trustees. And he's very, very easy person to work with. So I'm super excited by what's to come.
It really does seem that Booth is so much more integrated with the university than when we were there. And it's really great to see that. And I think it provides students with such a unique opportunity to sort of focus where their interests lie. So that's great to hear. My next question is, as things are beginning to open up again, how is Booth using the international campuses in London and Hong Kong to strengthen the experience for current students and alumni, actually?
Yeah, I mean, Hong Kong, I would say, Hong Kong is still not open. So in the sense that the city is open, but nobody's allowed to fly in and out. So we haven't had courses taught in person in Hong Kong since the pandemic began. London is actually open. London opened before the US did, right? Because the UK, Boris Johnson decided we're opening and let's, damn it, right? We're just going to do it. And so we've actually had faculty flying to London teaching in person since about July. So much before we started in Chicago. That's going very well. And the UK has been very open about allowing our students. So in London, our students come from, a little bit from the UK, but, for example, 15% now come from Africa. So we have a bunch of students who fly from Lagos to London to take classes. We have students from the Middle East who fly to London. And so that's working really well. So the new campus in London we were scheduled to open it March of last year. Didn't happen, obviously. It's now open and functioning, and we'll do a grand formal opening sometime next March. But that campus apparently is spectacular. I have not seen it since it was finished. We had an alum lend his art. So he has filled the building with his art. So it apparently looks spectacular. So anybody who has a chance to go to London, I would urge you to go visit. Randy Krosner, who's our deputy dean, has been living in London. He's coming back in December. But part of his role was to connect with the alumni there, to do more to sort of, get this new campus off the ground. So I think that's looking really good. Hong Kong will open. I think now that Asia is changing its strategy with COVID, I'm hoping it'll open up by January, February, and we will look forward to going there. That's obviously a stunning campus. We opened it in end of 2018, but nobody's been able to visit in person for the last year and a half, 2 years. All that said, the amazing thing is that that campus, we have 95 students started there like last month, even though they knew everything was going to be remote for at least a few months. So the demand for our program there in Asia is just amazing. And we get students from Japan, from the Philippines, Indonesia, all the way to India. So it's really become a pan-Asian program. And so I'm super excited about when things are going to open up. I'm flying to London in 3 weeks. Can't go to Hong Kong yet, but I'm hoping February or March it'll open up and I'll be able to go visit again. So we're very excited. I think the Chicago, London, Hong Kong, where we sort of have the campuses now, and it's just getting things rolling sort of post-COVID and keeping things moving. But we're very excited by how well the XP program is doing.
We'll just have to stalk you on social media for selfies on the London campus.
To see that.
I will. From in November when I get there, I'll definitely send it. The art apparently is amazing. So very excited about that.
Stop by one day. That leads to my next question about demand for the MBA programs. We've all read in the newspapers that there had been declining demand for MBAs of applications, and yet Booth actually saw an increase. Can you talk a little bit about what you think might have caused that?
We've done quite well over the last, for the last 2-3 years. We've set new records every year in applications. I think some of it is just that we sort of opened up our programs to allow more of what they call these 2+2 type programs, which is we've recognized that having students, sometimes students finish undergrad, take a job, and then they find it a few years later sort of harder to go back. So we've been trying to sort of get to people earlier, right? And at Chicago, we always had this Booth Scholars Program where we would have Chicago undergrads apply to Booth as a senior. We'd give them a deferred admission, and then they would come back 2-3 years from now. So we've now opened that up to sort of any university in the US. And that program has been very successful for us. So we have a lot of students, I think, applying to Booth now who might not have applied in the past and sort of taking a deferred admission. So I think that's been a big part of our success. I feel honestly like our academic reputation has just kept growing, and it's about the highest it's been. And we see that because the demand for the weekend program has also gone up. So we have students who come from Texas, as I said. We also have students from LA who come to Chicago to take classes. We have people from the East Coast coming to Chicago. So I think our academic reputation has grown. I think we have people know us as the school you come to if you actually want a rigorous MBA experience. So if you want to come to a place where you're willing to work hard, have faculty members who are absolute stars, but who will push you to think and learn, and you actually have to have grades, you have to take exams. People realize that if that's the MBA they want, we're sort of the right destination for people to come to, which I think is a perfect reputation to have. I think at the margin, that means some people may never apply to us, but I think that's fine. So I don't think we're sort of obsessed with having more and more people applying every year, but long as sort of the right sort of students apply who understand who we are and what the experiences they can hope to get from Chicago, I think that's all I'm looking for. And I do think we've changed the experience, right? It's no longer, I mean, the MBA community is very strong. All the students live close together in downtown Chicago. They have a wonderful network, a wonderful community. And I think a lot of the MBA is word of mouth, as you know, right? They ask, current first year, like, hey, are you having a good time? And I think we're doing well on those types of metrics. So it's been good to see the sort of increase in demand over time.
Absolutely. And I will just, before our last question, I'm just going to say, Dean Nondorf in admissions for the undergraduate is one of your biggest supporters because he's telling those high schoolers about the Booth Scholars Program. So just so you know, word is spreading far and wide. I'm well aware of that.
Yeah, Jim is amazing, as you know. And I mean, he and I have a wonderful collaboration. And I think that's been good for both sides, right? He loves the business economics thing that we're teaching. So, one of the things we do really well at Chicago is the veterans programs that we run. I think last year, 6% of our entering class were US military veterans, right? Which is amazing, higher than sort of by far anybody else. And so now U Chicago has launched a veterans program as well. And so we're working on ways to collaborate on maybe having them do like a 4+1, 4 years at U Chicago plus. So yeah, he's a wonderful partner, and it's a great relationship with him.
That's great. I'm going to turn it over to Murli for our last and final question.
We've got just a few more minutes here, Dean Rajan. What should we have asked you that we didn't in the last 45 minutes or so?
Wow. That's a great question. I don't know, honestly. I think this was super comprehensive because you talked about students, curriculum, programs that we run. I was, maybe priorities for the year, but we talked about that too. Oh, maybe I'll mention one thing, right? One of the big, interesting new things that happened this year, just a couple of months ago, is we opened our new downtown center to study behavioral science. So it's the first of its kind anywhere in the world. We're very, very proud of it. It's called MindWorks, and this was set up with the help of, a gift we got from PIMCO. And it's right across from the Art Institute, right? It's at 224 South Michigan. You walk in, you can learn about behavioral science. You can participate in actual research experiments that are going on there. And if you do well on the experiments, you can get a copy of, Taylor's book or Nick Epley's book or Eilert's book, over time. And so we've had a record number of people going through, though we just sort of opened it a couple of months ago. So for anybody who's in Chicago, I urge you to go take a look at this place. Again, if you're going to the Art Institute, just walk outside and you'll see it right across. So we're super excited about this. It really solidifies the importance of behavioral science at Chicago. Again, people don't really think of us as a behavioral school, but we have by far the best behavioral science faculty in the world. And I think the center is a great way to sort of amplify that and encourage sort of other faculty to come to Chicago. So I would say that the opening of MindWorks has been a huge positive for us too.
Thank you. And I just realized there's a couple of real quick questions we wanted to ask you.
Sure.
Number one is, you talked earlier about some of the new faculty members. Anyone else that you'd like to be able to highlight to the Dean Society members that we haven't had a chance to discuss, new faculty members to Booth?
Right. So last year, because of COVID, we didn't have a formal hiring process, but we were able to make an offer to Anna Costello, who was from MIT and then Michigan. And so she joined us as a full professor in accounting, as a tenured faculty member. So we're very, very excited about that. We also had 2 new faculty members join this year. And it's interesting, more and more in academia, faculty are taking postdocs, sort of like in the hard sciences. So we have 3 other faculty who are going to be joining us next year. And so all of them are either in microeconomics or macroeconomics. So we're very, very excited about that.
And speaking of economics, one absolute sort of curveball of a question. It's that time of the year.
Sure.
Give us your prediction of who might be the Nobel laureate in economics.
Oh, I would get in so much trouble for naming somebody and not somebody else. I'm going to stay very far away from that one. I will just say, we'll all wake up Monday, because it's Monday morning. We'll all wake up Monday morning and let's hope it's somebody connected to us. But I will say, the economics department hired Michael Kremer last year. He had won the Nobel Prize the year before for his work in development economics. So he's a wonderful addition to the university as well.
Fabulous. Fingers crossed on that, Dean Rajan. I'm going to hand it over to Ruchi to close us out.
Dean Rajan, thank you so much for your time today. And the conversation was wonderful. We learned a lot about the school and future initiatives. On behalf of the Dean, myself, and Murli, and all of us at University of Chicago Booth, thank you for joining us today. We know you have a lot of challenges and demands for your time and attention right now, and we appreciate your interest. We're grateful to have you as one of the best investors in the school and value your continued support. The annual fund team will send out a recording of today's conversation sometime next week, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dean.
Thank you. Thanks, Ruchi and Murli.
Such a pleasure. Bye.